I've seen Daphne.
Yeah, Daphne's on the way down.
Sorry, Bridge.
We can hold that for you.
I was holding the banner upside down.
Right.
That wasn't very clever.
If you could take some photos.
Andy, where's Andy Brooks? Andy, are you going to say a few words?
Just very briefly.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to, Scott or anyone else want to say a few words? After, what I'm intending to do is to just introduce the event in a minute, say a couple of words myself about what we're here for, and then ask people, not too many, but maybe 3 or 4 people to make a short contribution about why they're here, and then we'll have a minute's silence, and at the end of a minute's silence we will release the balloons, the black balloons together, okay? And then we will, and then Bridget will just tell you a couple of messages we've got about what's going on later today. So that's the plan. In terms of the photography, could we have the people who've got holding up placards actually come to the front so that you can see you're holding up a placard? Do you want to... That's lovely. You alright, Daphne?
Yes.
Are we alright to go? Yeah?
Yes.
Good. Alright, well, thank you everyone for coming down here today. We're assembling outside the Ukrainian Embassy in London, in Holland Park in London, as we have done for the last 2 years, because today, the 2nd of May, is the anniversary of the atrocity which took place in the city of Odessa on the 2nd of May 2014, where an unknown number of people, but in excess of 40 people, certainly, local people from Odessa, anti-fascists, trade unionists, were burnt alive by fascists in the trade union house of Odessa. And this was a deliberate attack that was planned by far-right political forces, local politicians, utilising football firms who've been brought in, football ultras who've been brought in from outside Odessa in order to attack people who were standing up against the fraud which was the so-called Maidan Revolution. And the atrocity which was carried out against the anti-fascists in Odessa must never be forgotten. We're here because we're commemorating those people and because we're calling for justice for the victims who died in the trade union house in Odessa, and justice for all the victims of fascism in Ukraine and throughout the world. But it's particularly significant that we're here on this day, the 2nd of May, because of course those of us in the trade union movement, those of us in the anti-imperialist movement, those of us who are anti-fascists know our history, and we remember that the 2nd of May was the date when the German Nazis liquidated the trade union movement in Germany in 1934. The day after the May Day demonstrations in Germany, every single trade union office throughout Germany was shut down by the German Nazi Party. Trade unionists and communists were interned in the first concentration camp in Germany, Sachsenhausen, and that led directly to the Holocaust, the greatest atrocity of the 20th century, committed by fascism in the name of fascism against the peoples of Germany, and that same terrible atrocity has been repeated Today, the creeping fascism which we see in Ukraine is also showing worrying signs of emerging in other former socialist countries. We've seen the terrifying attempts to ban symbols of communism in Poland, in the Baltic republics. We've seen recent increases in votes for far-right parties in Slovakia and indeed in Poland. And all of these are signs that a brown plague is being encouraged to re-emerge. And we know that there are millions of people in Ukraine who remember their history, who remember that the people of Ukraine and Belarus suffered more than perhaps any other people during the Second World War in terms of the portion of their population that was extinguished, murdered, butchered in the most atrocious circumstances by the fascists. And we know that today in Odessa there are 3,000 members of the neo-Nazi Azov battalion who've been drafted in to Odessa, to the city centre, in order to prevent assemblies such as this one taking place in Odessa, outside the building where the atrocity by the fascists was organised and took place. And we know that there are people in Odessa who were attacked just a few weeks ago for celebrating the anniversary of the liberation of Odessa by the Red Army. And the fascists were out attacking those protesters in Odessa just a few weeks ago. So we know that there are thousands of people in the Ukraine, in Odessa, right across the country, who were determined to resist the fascist onslaught. We stand in solidarity with them, and we will remember the victims of the trade union house in Odessa, who were murdered, burnt alive, shot as they were trying to escape from a burning building 2 years ago today in 2014. And we pledge ourselves to continue to come here and to do everything we can to campaign for justice, for the victims of the Odessa atrocity, and for all victims of fascism. That's all I want to say on behalf of the campaign Solidarity with the Anti-Fascist Resistance in the Ukraine. But I think there are some other people who've come from different parts of the country today, different parts of Britain, and from different organisations who would like to probably say a few words. So I'm going to invite them to come forward and speak on behalf of their organisation. So perhaps, I think we've got somebody from the Bristol, Ukraine Anti-Fascist Solidarity campaign here. Can I ask Giles to come and say a few words?
Very briefly, I'm from the Bristol, Ukraine Anti-Fascist Solidarity. We've been mounting regular pickets outside the BBC in Bristol, drawing attention to the lies and disinformation which is spread by the media about what is happening in now fascist Ukraine. We wish to be here to pay our respects to the dead, to offer our condolences to the relatives of the dead, and to give our solidarity to all those who are picking up the banner and fighting still against fascism. Whether it's in the Donbass itself, the Donbass resistance, I'd like to issue a heartfelt call for the victory of the Donbass resistance, or whether it's in the rest of Ukraine, because the whole population of Ukraine, apart from a tiny minority of oligarchs, is under the hammer right now from IMF imposed austerity. So, for those who are in Odessa now under much more difficult circumstances than we have here, struggling for justice, struggling for accountability, because no one has ever been arrested for the events 2 years ago. So we offer our family sympathies and all the solidarity we must.
Well said.
I think Andy Brooks.
Yes, I may say a few words. From the New Communist Party and the New Worker, obviously to give our full support for this action, and we've got many tasks ahead of us. I mean, the past week or so, we have seen within the Labour movement a witch hunt against Naz Shah and the former Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone. Now, Livingstone and Shah, they're not the greatest academics, they speak with their heart, and yet the people who are against them, who are these people? They claim to be anti-fascists, like their MP, Mann, but they're not anti-fascists. What are they? They're Zionists. They support imperialism, and we never see them here. And we never see them, as far as I know, ever protesting at what is happening in the Ukraine, where we have a fascist government. Now, some people will tell you there's different grades of fascists, that some are not too bad, and some are like the Nazis, and some like the Banderists, and this, that, and the other. They're all the same, they have different degrees. I always say this, the principle of fascism, as Alex explained when they turned on the unions, is that management must have the right to manage, and that unions and anything which gets in the way of the employer has to be knocked out. Now, how they do it, we see in the Ukraine, is through anti-Semitism and all the rest of it. And we have a big struggle in the Labour movement to get this argument across, that the people in the Ukraine, in Novorossiya, in the People's Republics of the Donbass, and the people in Ukraine itself are fighting against fascism. And just as that slogan says, death to fascism, they shall not pass. We've got to take that up in the Labour movement. We've got to make the case by standing side by side with our comrades in the socialist organisations in Ukraine to fight against the ban, against left-wing organisations, against the ban, against free trade unions, and in solidarity with those fighting to bring the fascist regime in the Ukraine down. What we need is more and more activity by SARU and the other organisations which are affiliated, not just in London but everywhere, against the Ukraine and all its agencies, and to take this message throughout the Labour movement. I know the RMT has done sterling work, and we have to build on that as well. We do what we can, and we must build on what we've got. I'd like to thank everyone here. We're very pleased to be here with you. Thank you.
Well said.
Well said.
I think that, did you want to say a couple of words, Marie?
Yes.
Is there anyone else who wants to speak on behalf of their organisation, or just say a few words personally? Marie.
Hello, comrades. I am a Fascist Protest. I salute the comrades here for the support they are giving to those who have died in the struggle against fascism, which includes not just those of Odessa, but also those of the Soviet Union. And today, I think it's become obvious that the capitalist system is incapable of providing for everybody. It's like a straitjacket in which we have to survive as best we can with less and less means, whilst a tiny minority of people appropriate everything. And so this is not a sustainable regime, and it knows it, and it has only one answer, which is killing all this surplus of humanity, killing people because it cannot cope with them. And this is what they are preparing, and now it's creeping, like you said, Alex, it's creeping, it's a creeping process in Europe, and it's not just in Eastern Europe, but it's also here. Because when they want to test little children of 3 to see how they perform in order to compete with other countries in education, that is fascist. And I would say now, just to finish, that I agree with what has been proposed about the organization, and I will try to help along with it. And what is more, I think the victory in Ukraine, the victory for the comrades that Alex mentioned, the important thing is that they are there, they are fighting against fascism. It's not that fascism has free reign, but they are fighting. There are people fighting over there, and the way to support them is to organize here on the European scene. And so we need in Britain a united front of all the forces of progress, at the same time as building a European united front and pushing in the Labour Party as much as one can, bringing the Marxist ideas in the Labour Party, because they are not going to be able to survive as Labour leaders without beginning to use their heads and scientific ideas. And the scientific ideas is Marxism. Therefore, I say victory to the people against fascism in Europe.
Well done, Mary.
I don't want to have a political meeting out here with lots and lots of speeches. I think we're here to commemorate